If everyone paid $3 per year, we would reverse all man-made global warming.
From a CO2 emission perspective, I could be like the biggest energy hog, but it's okay because I've paid you 15 cents.
We place sulfur dioxide gas into the balloon, and then it pops.
One billionaire can take his yacht out to the ocean and just start throwing up SO2 balloons and solving the entire world's problem.
I honestly think climate change is one of the stupidest problems that humanity has created for themselves.
Welcome to Doom Debates. My guest today is Andrew Song, the co-founder of a company that I believe is actually solving climate change. It's called Make Sunsets, and it's doing geoengineering. We'll talk about it more in a second. Andrew has a BA in economics from NYU, and he was previously an early employee at Scale AI doing operations. I'm excited to talk to him about the Make Sunsets pitch, what the situation looks like with climate change, and can we avoid that particular type of doom? Andrew Song, welcome to Doom Debates.
Thank you for having me.
This is the rare Doom episode I'm doing, which is not artificial intelligence Doom. Occasionally, I stick my head up and I look at some of the other types of Doom that humanity might face just to see what's going on over there, what's going on with nuclear, what's going on with climate. And that is where you spend your whole time, focusing on mitigating climate doom, correct?
That is correct.
You guys started 3 years ago, and you've become increasingly high profile in the kind of rationalist, effective altruist communities because your approach seems to make a lot of sense. I've been following you guys for a while, but for the viewers, let's hear the 1 or 2 minute pitch.
Sure. Make Sunsets launches reflective clouds near the ozone layer to cool Earth. What we do is we mimic the cooling process of stratovolcanic eruptions, specifically the one that happened in 1991 called Mount Pinatubo, where it roughly injected about 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, and it cooled the planet by 0.5 degrees Celsius for about a year. This one single volcanic eruption literally reversed global warming by 2 decades. Because the current rate of warming that scientists have said is that for every decade, we warm the planet by 0.25 degrees Celsius. This is because of the greenhouse gases that we emit, roughly around 70 billion tons per year. And so we've accumulated these greenhouse gases that have warmed up the planet. And so what we're trying to do is apply a little bit of sunscreen above the rain clouds, above the weather, to buy humanity a little bit more time until we can decarbonize our economies and also remove that excess CO2 that we've been accumulating since the 1850s.
Hell yeah. Okay, sounds good. So this is very much a geoengineering solution, correct? We don't have to reduce our climate output. We can just geoengineer it away.
Absolutely.
So what you've actually been doing is you fill up these balloons with sulfur dioxide, and then you have the balloons float up until they get to the stratosphere, and then you just
Correct.
have them pop?
It's dead simple. And so this is just the physics of weather balloons themselves. First, you weigh the mass of the balloon itself, the empty weight. Then we place some sulfur dioxide gas into the balloon. And then we put lift gas, generally hydrogen, into the balloon. And then the way that the balloon is constructed is biodegradable latex. They're rated to pop above 20 kilometers. And so as the balloon gets higher and higher into the atmosphere, the air pressure gets less and less. At ground level, it's roughly around 10 feet in diameter. But in the stratosphere, it gets up to 20 to 30 feet in diameter. And then finally it pops it. I think Emmett Shear, one of your guests before, had said something really poignant that we're just kicking the can down the road. That's what humanity's doing. Right now, humanity's too reliant on fossil fuels. And so if we stop tomorrow, that will cause catastrophic events. And so in the meantime, we just have to keep kicking this can down the road and keep kicking. And what stratospheric aerosol injection is essentially Ozempic for climate change.
It's Ozempic, it's a Band-Aid. Okay, well, speaking of analogies, tell me about the company name Make Sunsets.
Make Sunsets is named after the actual effect when you do this at scale. You can actually see this phenomenon happening in Hawaii all the time because there are active volcanoes continually injecting sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere. And so what you get are these beautiful sunsets, the purples and oranges that you see. Or sometimes if you just look out at the sunset, when you ever see like a beautiful sunset, what you're really looking at is pollution.
Right. Could you also call it make volcanic eruptions? Because that's how you explained it before, right? It's like another Mount Pinatubo eruption.
Right. Yeah. It might have been too much on the nose. I think a little bit of poetic license there. And then also, at the end of the day, we do want to stop this eventually. We want to sunset this product. We want to sunset this service. We don't want to be doing this for 100 years. We might have to, but it's something that we should stop and tail off as we start to decarbonize our economies and start to remove that excess CO2, which is essentially the root problem of climate change.
We're going to talk more about your solution and how long it's going to be a band-aid for, but I want to backtrack first and talk about what's the deal with climate change. It's like always coming up and it's like, is it getting any better? Should we, or is there any hope of reducing CO2? What if the temperature goes up a couple degrees, right? There's all these basic questions. So I guess my first question is like, okay, so the temperature has risen like 1 degree Celsius over the last 50 years, right? Like that's like the fact on the ground.
So the way that scientists measure like the P-doom is based off how much the temperatures have risen since the 1850s, because that's when we start injecting greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And since then, we've essentially warmed up the planet by 1.2 to 1.3 degrees Celsius. And there's this thing called the Paris Agreement where basically all the countries in the world got together and said, hey, we're not going to cross over this threshold of 1.5 C. We've broached that several times now in the past 3 years, and that's essentially caused a lot of turmoil around the world because, as you might know, there's been a lot of wildfires, there's been a lot of heat waves that have been continually increasing as we continue to inject greenhouse gases into our atmosphere.
You mention all these different countries are getting concerned about hitting this 1.5 degree Celsius temperature limit. Let me segue into the big question. You ready?
Yeah.
P-doom, P-doom, what's your P-doom, what's your P-doom, what's your P-doom?
Andrew Song, what is your P-doom from climate change?
My P-doom for climate change is less than 5%. Currently, we are not focused on climate change in terms of solving it, but as the world heats up, I think that it will be addressed and something that will be eventually solved. But right now, it's just a matter of prioritization. And as we address this problem more and more by applying sunscreen for Earth, that P-doom will decrease. But currently, since we're not focused on it, that P-doom is somewhat higher than it should be.
Right. So you see it as a fundamentally addressable and even easy problem that hasn't been addressed, but you're going to work on addressing it and you think it'll probably succeed.
That's correct. Hopefully.
I actually agree with you, which I think is very interesting because I don't think that this perspective is discussed much. And hopefully this episode will help viewers get on that page.
Thank you. Yeah. That's the goal. If we don't start removing gigatons of CO2 from our atmosphere and scale it up by 2100, a lot of bad things are going to happen, and we're not even close to that. The largest carbon removal direct air capture plant right now, Climeworks, roughly estimates that they can remove about 4,000 tons of CO2 per year, and they've raised roughly around $800 million. But based off recent reports, they have not done any net removal of CO2 based off their operations and stuff. Just to again recap, humans roughly emit around 70 billion tons of CO2 per year, and literally the largest company in the world only removes about 4,000.
All right, so going back to what's the deal with climate change? I think you mentioned some kind of disaster threshold, right? Maybe tell me I guess the terrible scenario and the okay muddling through scenario and the ideal scenario for climate change.
I mean, I think right now we're at that doorstep right now at roughly 1.2, 1.3 C. If you look at the graphs, there has been more wildfires, there has been more floods. These storms have been more intense. To give you a actual dollar amount, Bloomberg had said in the past 12 months, starting if you backtrack from May 2025, the U.S. has experienced about $1 trillion worth of property damage. And so, and that just happened in the last 12 months since May 2025.
Are you sure that's counterfactually an extra trillion compared to the amount of accidents that we'd have if there was no climate change?
It's been continually increasing. That's the thing, that dollar amount. And so all the reinsurance companies have said in the next 5 years, we'll experience about $1 trillion worth of property damage losses worldwide. And, one of the promising things about, those graphs as well is that there's actually been a decrease in the amount of deaths from climate change because of the resilience that we built up. And so, unfortunately, there's humans, but then there's also the ecological collapse, right? Squirrels and monkeys don't have access to AC. And so once the biodiversity starts getting too hot, that's when you start running into problems. And so, we talk about these are all tipping points, at 2 degrees Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. Roughly 50% of all coral will be bleached, which is very unfortunate. And if you keep increasing, the global temperatures, more and more catastrophic things will.
You don't think more coral is going to evolve and take that new niche?
So that's the thing. The rapid amount of warming, you call it, and just the biology can't keep up. And so
Sure.
that's the problem here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's a
evolution
good
takes.
observation. Yeah. It's like a
Yeah,
rapid niche change.
exactly. The rate of warming is spiking right now, and so that's an unfortunate fact. Humans came onto the scene and started to burn fossil fuels, and that was correlated with the warming effect.
So let's talk about geoengineering. So the point of geoengineering is basically like, yeah, emitting carbon dioxide just is what it is. Emitting methane just is what it is. Don't even necessarily try to slow it down, or if we can, it's a bonus. But how can we either remove carbon from the atmosphere? That's like a really cool solution. Or failing that, let's do what you guys are doing, which is dumping sulfur dioxide or some other what you call a band-aid. Let's just dump that in the sky. Talk more about what that does.
Sure. So there's a big umbrella of geoengineering, and that falls in the category of carbon removal is one of them. And then a sub umbrella of that is called solar radiation management, so SRM. And so that's the specific field that we play in. Any form of injecting any kind of aerosol or trying to change the climate is essentially called geoengineering. But what we're specifically focused on is that humanity hasn't figured out how to stop emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And humans are very resistant to change. And when you tell someone to say, "Hey, stop driving your F-150," or "Hey, you got to switch to EVs," or "Hey, you got to stop eating meat," there's a lot of resistance that happens. And so we're saying that you have to do both. You have to remove that CO2 from the atmosphere, but that scale up hasn't happened yet. We're still very early stages. So the analogy I like to give is similar to solar. Solar wasn't a big deal until 1975. And that's when Germany first subsidized solar energy, and it started to actually roll out fairly efficiently. And then you saw that cost curve get cheaper and cheaper in deployments more and more. Before that, solar was just kind of an experiment. That's where we are with carbon removal. We're still in the very early stages, and it's still very, very much a prototype stage. And so we need to do both. It's the 1-2 punch against climate change, where we remove the CO2, but that scale up is going to take a long time. So in the meantime, let's apply a little Band-Aid here so we can keep things cool. So then when we do have that opportunity to actually cool down the planet via removal of CO2, we can start tapering off solar geoengineering. And so the specific technology that I'm talking about of solar radiation management, there's many ways to actually influence what is called radiative forcing. So this is how much energy is being absorbed from Earth versus reflected away. And so you can paint your roof white. That's a form of actually influencing radiative forcing. You can actually go higher by a technology called marine cloud brightening, where essentially you get a ship, you find a low-level cloud, spray some sea salt, and that brightens clouds. But the most well-studied, the most well-accepted in terms of like the intervention is stratospheric aerosol injection, which is injecting sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere. You can even go a level higher by actually putting a constellation of satellites by the Lagrange point, which is in between the sun and the Earth, to essentially create space mirrors. That's the holy grail. That's like type 1 types of like civilization kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the
But
constellation of satellites, I mean, is that even feasible with current technology? Don't you need like a
no,
ton of satellites? Okay.
exactly. So
Right.
this is trillions of dollars, and the material science is not there. Launch costs are too expensive. And
Trillions
so
of dollars. Okay. Yeah, that's
yeah,
definitely an emergency solution right there. Okay. So
exactly.
basically you're saying you've kind of cataloged the problems with all these other geoengineering approaches, and then that brings us back to what you guys are doing.
Correct. Correct.
All right. Yeah. So
Uh,
explain that.
So essentially, we're mimicking what volcanoes have been doing for millions of years. Pinatubo is the example that I gave before. But another one that happened most recently was Hunga Tonga off the coast of New Zealand, where this essentially about 300 to 700,000 tons of sulfur dioxide cooled the southern hemisphere by 0.1 degrees Celsius for about a year. And so we kind of A/B tested hemispheres with these
Huh.
last two volcanic eruptions.
Right.
And to even belabor the point, we have analogs for this from the human types of geoengineering using sulfate aerosols. There was the IMO 2020, the International Maritime Organization, where essentially these ships were emitting SO2 into these shipping lanes, and you saw what was called ship tracks. So satellite infrastructure detected that, hey, before January 1st, 2020, there was a cooling effect happened, but once we stopped, there was a net warming effect. And so this was this agreement that the International Maritime Organization said that all large shipping emissions, they got to reduce the sulfur content from their fuel from, I believe, it was like I want to say about 3% down to like 0.05%. And so all of a sudden, you just saw this stoppage of geoengineering at the tropospheric level. Another example is the amount of sulfur dioxide that we used to emit during like around the 1970s, 1980s. Roughly, it was around 130 million tons per year. And then because of the Clean Air Act, because of the EPA, because of the agreement that everyone said, hey, sulfur dioxide is clearly bad, it causes acid rain, we've cut it down to roughly around 70 million tons of sulfur dioxide. And that has actually unmasked the warming. And so we have been already artificially influenced radiative forcing by turning it off and on, essentially.
Right.
We've just been doing it at the wrong level. We've been doing it at the wrong level and too much of it at the wrong level. And so to even make the point even further, if you stopped all SO2 emissions tomorrow, which is at 70 million tons roughly, we would live in a 0.57 degrees Celsius warmer climate, which again is not
Right.
good. And
Yeah.
so
Give me a sense of the scale of this thing, right? Do you happen to know, is it measured like in gallons? And like, do you know how much the shipping was doing that then turned off?
I don't have it offhand of the amount, but in terms of the actual cooling that it was causing and then the spike in temperatures right afterwards was 0.05 degrees Celsius was the rough number, where it was noticeable by satellite saying that, hey, like clearly it used to be cool here and all of a sudden it spiked by 0.05 degrees Celsius.
Wow. So we had a dial that we can turn just like that, where like within a year, we decided to do something that predictably made the temperature 0.05 degrees warmer.
Exactly. And scientists talked about it before it was going to happen. And then, they called the shot and they were correct. And so people like Casey Hamier keep saying the meme is we got to put the sulfur back. We've got to put the boat juice back into to the boats. So like,
Yeah, exactly. Right. So you're basically trying to rehabilitate sulfur dioxide because everybody thinks it has a bad reputation from acid rain and it's considered a pollutant. So everybody's like, oh, minimize the sulfur dioxide. And you're like, no. Sulfur dioxide is actually the good guy. Right.
well, it depends, right? Like just like the ozone layer, everyone loves the ozone layer. It depends on where you put it. Ozone is considered a pollutant at ground level. It causes asthma, causes respiratory illnesses, and it's not good for you. If you pump O3 into your house, you will not be feeling good. Same with sulfur dioxide. But if you apply it in the right place, aka the stratosphere, hey, it protects you from UV radiation. And so the EPA even says there's good ozone, there's bad ozone. And what we're trying to make the point is there's good sulfur dioxide and there's bad sulfur dioxide.
And it's bad if you have it at ground level.
Correct.
And is acid rain a level that you can avoid acid rain by just going above the clouds?
Correct. It's part that and also, again, the amount. At ground level, it's 20 times less effective than it is in the stratosphere because what we're essentially taking advantage of is this thing called the Brewer-Dobson circulation. And so this is how ozone is also transported worldwide, is that O3 molecules are created near the tropics because that's where most of the sun gets hit from Earth. And essentially, once that ozone is created, the Brewer-Dobson circulation first moves these aerosols east and west around the equator, and then slowly transports to the poles. And so it's essentially this layer of sunscreen. All we're saying is that we can augment that with a natural process with sulfur dioxide instead.
So tell me about the lifting gas. Is it helium?
We used to use helium, but one, it's too expensive, and two, it's not renewable. And so we switched to hydrogen.
Which obviously, as we know from the Hindenburg, is flammable, but that's not really a problem for you, right?
Correct. The Hindenburg gets a bad rap. The image that you saw in the newsreels that you saw, the videos that you saw, it's because the envelope was made out of aluminum
Mm.
and iron. And so essentially you create thermite. And
Oh,
And so when it actually started to burn, most of the hydrogen quickly actually just dissipated up into the air. But since the envelope itself was made of aluminum and iron skin, which is essentially thermite, that's what caused that kind of really shocking image. And so we don't use thermite on our balloons. And two, again, the lifting gas is very if we do it in open air, there's no risk of actual type of explosion or anything like that.
right. So because the sulfur dioxide is heavier, does it mean like half the balloon has to be lifting gas?
Essentially just has to be positively buoyant. And so it depends on how much sulfur dioxide that we have, also the payload of the telemetry itself. the parachute, the drone, all these other instrumentation that we attach to it. And then, we try to figure out what is that net amount. It varies the amount of lifting gas that we put up.
Okay, so you've been sending up the sulfur dioxide one balloon at a time. How many balloons have you sent up total?
To date, roughly around 200 balloons.
How big is each balloon?
The current balloon sizes that it's based off the weight itself, and that's just how much latex there is 1,500 grams. These balloons are hardly leveraged. 1 gram of sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere offsets the warming effect of 1 ton of CO2 for a year. So that's a 1 to million leverage. And so we roughly, launch about 1,500 grams of SO2 in per balloon. The equivalent of that is roughly like 40,000 trees in one balloon in itself, in terms of the equivalent.
1.5 kilograms, that's how much the SO2 in the balloon weighs. And you're saying when you launch that, that means somebody is allowed to then go and emit like 1.5 million kilograms of carbon dioxide?
Yep, exactly. So, or
Whoa,
what,
1.5 million kilograms. How much do
Yeah.
I, as a person with my American lifestyle, how much do I emit?
So the average American roughly emits around 1,600 kilograms or 16 tons of CO2 per year.
Okay, so wow, that's like 1,000 of me basically. So basically you can cover 1,000 people's lifestyle when you just launch one balloon.
That is correct, for a year. Because again, this is the residence time. We've observed with volcanic eruptions, because of the Bird-Dobson effect, what's called the residence time of how long the aerosol actually lasts. If you inject it 20 kilometers above, roughly the residence time is about 1 to 3 years. So that's the cooling effect that you get, but our claims are a little bit more conservative. But also, if you inject sulfur dioxide in the troposphere, depending on rain patterns and stuff, it roughly lasts about 10 days. So that's why we apply it in the stratosphere versus the troposphere, because there's a lot of weather activity and it falls out.
What if I wanted to just go launch my own balloon? Where would I get the SO2?
Just a gas supply store, your typical
Nice.
welding supply store. You can get pure SO2 and 99.99% purity. So this is something you can just do yourself. We actually have a little subsection on our website where we published a tutorial on Make Magazine on how to launch your own stratospheric aerosol injection balloons.
Where does the gas supply store get the SO2?
So this is the most ironic part of where SO2 is sourced. I mean, we don't know the full supply chain of where it comes from. We're just the end customer, but a lot of sulfur dioxide is sourced from the refinement of oil. And so there's this thing called a Klaus process where there's different types of grades of oil. The one specifically that we're interested in is called sour oil and sour gas. And so during the refinement process, you have to extract H2S. And so what that does is during the Klaus process, what they'll do is they'll crack H2S and you'll get SO2 and H2, and then they'll crack SO2 again to then get elemental sulfur. And so you can actually see this from Google Maps, where next to these refineries that process sour oil and sour gas are huge piles of sulfur, just yellow piles of sulfur right next to it. And so it's essentially a waste product.
These gas stores, why are they stocking the SO2? Who's using it?
Right now, most of it's used as a fungicide. A lot of wineries use it to essentially preserve their grapes, as well as it's actually injected into wine itself. SO2 is a preservative. And so if you don't put SO2, sulfur already exists in natural wines, but they add a little bit more in order to preserve it.
So most people are like drinking this wine and then they just like pee it out basically and absorb some of the nutrients. And then where does the sulfur go?
It just goes into the ground, yeah. And so it's the natural process of sulfur dioxide, and
Right. So
it's
it's like a
also
waste of
used.
sulfur, right? That should be
Yeah,
connected to the oxygen and being a gas and helping us block, reflect away some of the sun. And remind me again, when the sulfur dioxide is in the atmosphere, what it's doing is it's reflecting the sun away.
correct. Yeah, it's a very reflective material, and so it's in the category of what is called aerosols. And so there's aerosols and there's greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases obviously absorb sun's energy, and aerosols reflect it away.
Gotcha. Okay, wow. So it's kind of funny. We've got this supply chain, right? All of these gas stores have all this sulfur dioxide. Do you happen to know what is the total supply in our economy right now? Like if every gas store were monopolized by your company, then how
You
much
don't
could
even
we?
need to
Yeah,
monopolize all the gas stores.
really.
There's a one certain oil company in the Middle East that currently produces about 10 million tons of sulfur elemental sulfur just from their industrial processes. And so that's more than enough to cool the entire planet by 0.5 degrees Celsius.
Are they selling all of that sulfur? Like, is that all sulfur getting bought in the economy right now, or is some of it kind of buried or something?
It's essentially a waste product. Mostly, it's used to convert into sulfuric acid, and that's one of the more common acids that are used in industrial process to make other things. It can also be used to be added to rubber, which is the vulcanization process to make it actually pliable. Also, makeup products, again, agricultural needs. Elemental sulfur itself is a fungicide, and so it's also used in medicine. Sulfur is used in medicine, so there's a lot of reasons, but it's extremely inexpensive. 1 ton of sulfur costs roughly $100 to $200.
Gotcha. Okay. And 1 ton of sulfur is enough to then launch like 700 of your balloons, which would then offset like 1,000 tons, right, of people's yearly CO2 usage, correct?
Well, we can create an ice age with this if we really wanted to, but obviously
Yeah.
we're not in that business.
So there's 10 million tons of sulfur dioxide getting produced just by this one oil company. And
Yeah.
if we were to just go launch that with your balloons, that would be so many balloons, right? That would be like 10 billion balloons because you only
Yeah,
do it
it would
like
be a lot of
1 kilo.
balloons.
Yeah, yeah, it'd be so
We
many
would
balloons.
That's a great
Like,
question. So now we're
yeah,
talking about scaling issues. And so, right now, the balloons that we launch right now, is like our electric skateboard. We haven't built the Model S yet. Our next step in the company process to scale to 1 ton balloons. Those 1 ton balloons are about the size of football fields. These are massive balloons, but balloon technology is fairly well solved. It's been around since the 1700s. And so 1 ton could offset the warming effect of 1 million tons of CO2 per year. For every trillion tons of CO2 you put into the atmosphere, based off IPCC modeling, the average amount of warming that is caused by 1 trillion tons of CO2 is 0.45 degrees Celsius of warming. So to counteract that, neutralize that, you need roughly 1 million tons of sulfur dioxide in the stratosphere to reverse that 0.45 C of
a
cooling.
trillion tons of CO2. Is that like a decade's worth of emissions roughly?
So the world has emitted roughly around 1.6 trillion tons of CO2 since the Industrial Revolution.
So if we're trying to roll back the entire industrial revolution, which is like a 1.5 trillion tons of CO2 emission, then we need 1.5 million tons of sulfur dioxide, which is like 1 billion of your current balloons.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, and it's definitely not unthinkable to think that our economy could produce 1 billion of these little balloons if we cared.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's already robots that launch these balloons by themselves. The weather service does it actually.
Right. I mean, we produce like 1 billion computer chips a year in the economy, right? In the world economy. And certainly launching a balloon is a hell of a lot easier than building a computer chip.
Yeah. And it's a renewable resource. Literally comes from trees themselves because it's rubber trees. That's where latex comes from.
Exactly. So this is pretty crazy and stunning. I mean, as somebody who's personally just sensitive to orders of magnitude, we're noticing like, hey, has anybody noticed that this thing is like 100 times bigger than that thing, even though people are treating it equally? That's what got me interested in Make Sunsets. I'm like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that like the entire cost to like solve all the climate change warming problem that we have is, I mean, how would you even put a cost number on this? I mean, I'm not saying roll back to the Industrial Revolution, but let's just say like give us 1 degree of cooling, 1 degree Celsius of cooling. How much would that cost? Like 100 billion or something?
I haven't done the math on that. I think it would be roughly around. I think the last calculation I did with Casey Hanmer was that if you wanted to achieve about 0.5 degrees Celsius of cooling, it would cost roughly around $1 billion per year. And so if you want to double that, I guess 1 degree Celsius, that's it would be roughly $2 billion per year.
So $2 billion per year to just to prevent what would otherwise be 1 degree of warming. That seems incredibly cheap.
It is, and this is why a lot of environmentalists are against this. Ironically, is because it's too easy. It's I like to call it Ozempic for climate change. You didn't suffer.
But this is truly truly ridiculous. I mean, the fact that you have to start this company and like you do this media tour and like hope that somebody notices or like hope the government notices. It's like, hold on, $1 billion. That's like Bill Gates could just go out on his yacht and launch a bunch of balloons or like, just pay a flotilla or whatever and just like and just get it done. And the rest of humanity can just be like sleeping on the problem. And that's fine, right? You don't need any coordination whatsoever. You just need one enterprising billionaire.
Yeah, Yeah, and that's what I hope to achieve with this podcast. But the funny thing is that Bill Gates tried. He gave $20 million to this project called ScopeX out of Harvard, and unfortunately, they couldn't even get one balloon off because this came from an academic push. Academics, unfortunately, are more focused on modeling. It's very similar to how AI is currently being rolled out.
Right. Okay, Bill Gates. Bill Gates, call the number on the screen right now to solve global climate change, please.
Well, guys who can deliver, right? I think the unfortunate thing was that they had very credible scientists that were able to weigh out all the risks, but unfortunately, a bunch of NIMBYs stopped them, and they didn't decide to move to another place to launch. They just said, "Hey, Sweden said no. Let's just not do it." So that was an unfortunate, frustrating thing that inspired me to say, "Hey, clearly this works. There's a Harvard scientist backed by Bill Gates trying to do it." And they were just blocked by essentially NIMBYs saying, "Don't do it in my backyard." And so
Yeah.
I saw that as like, this is ridiculous. Like,
Now,
it's
when you say
clearly cheap.
backyard, I mean, it's not like the sulfur dioxide hovers just over them, right? I mean, who cares about
Correct.
if whose backyard it's in?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is another thing. People don't understand the difference between the troposphere and the stratosphere. And so the knee-jerk reaction, as you kind of broached before, is that, hey, if you do this, you're going to cause acid rain. But that's entirely not true. The analogy I like to give is there's good ozone, there's bad ozone. There's good sulfur dioxide, there's bad sulfur dioxide. But most people equate any type of sulfur dioxide in any place of the atmosphere causes, catastrophic things.
You guys have been operating for 3 years, and people are actually paying you, individuals are paying you to launch some of these balloons. So roughly how much do people pay you to launch a balloon?
So the average, or to launch 1 gram of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere costs $1. But that's our current subsidized VC cost. If we can scale this up, we can get it down to sub 1 cent level.
Okay, so in terms of one balloon, so that's like $1,500 for a balloon, but you're saying that it
Correct.
only has to cost like $15.
Yeah, yeah. Again, sulfur is cheap, right? It's
Right.
about $100 to $200 per ton. Hydrogen, essentially, you can do is electrolysis.
Yeah, and what's crazy is like in the case of those ships that were forced to not emit, it's like they actually lost money because they weren't emitting, right? They had to like clean their air before emitting, which cost them money. So this is very much an example of just like a knowledge deficit, right? This isn't even like a fundamental economic constraint here. It's literally just like realizing that it's nice to emit sulfur dioxide so we can cool the planet and like agreeing to do it instead of being squeamish about it and wanting to get all environmentalists about it. I mean, the opposite of this, in my mind, the opposite of this is personal behavioral change, right? Somebody being like, oh, I need an Energy Star appliance so that my shower it can be like shorter. I can like use, or I can use less energy on my shower so I'll emit less CO2. It's like, dude, pay, if you only need to pay 1/100th of a balloon. So at the current cost of 1,500, if I just pay you guys $15 for 1% of one of your balloons, I have now given myself license to live like an American in terms of my energy usage, right? For the whole next year because I paid you guys $15. So why would I ever give a second's thought to this idea of like, oh, let me not warm my house as much or like let me not do whatever I want. No, I've already paid you my $15 for the year. So this idea of personal behavioral change is insane to me.
Yeah, it is, and it hasn't worked. The past 30 years, quote unquote, environmentalists have said, "Hey, you got to change the way your life lived because you're emitting too much CO2." But that hasn't worked, in my opinion. Like, we've failed by guilting people.
When I say $15, if there were a little bit of scale to this, like you said, it's not $15, it's 15 cents.
Yeah,
So I could be like
yeah,
I could like never turn off my lights from a CO2 emission perspective. I could be like the biggest energy hog who doesn't care to change my behavior at all. But it's okay because I've paid you 15 cents. So anytime you've ever seen like a public service announcement to change your behavior in order to not emit CO2, you've just been like gaslighted basically.
pretty much, pretty much. To be fair, there's a caveat here. The residence time of CO2 is roughly around 100 to 1,000 years, and so you still have to address your historical emissions as well.
Sure.
And then
Okay, yeah.
also,
You know what? I'm
as you
going to
move forward.
pay 25 cents instead of 15 cents for the
Yeah,
next year.
yeah. I mean,
It's like
at scale, it comes out to just Americans. If everyone paid $3 per year, we would reverse all of man-made global warming. That's the math,
right.
essentially. That's the cost of a Smithsonian.
This is, in fact, one reason why I do live my life as an energy hog and I don't feel
Sure.
guilt about it. Because
Yeah.
it's like, I just think that the movement to make people feel guilty about their energy usage is so counterproductive because then,
Yeah,
yeah,
highly
what do people do?
unproductive.
They're like, oh, I'm turning off my light or like I'm using I'm running my appliance in eco mode and they're wasting their thought process thinking about that. when they would be helping so much more if they're just like, oh, I didn't have my lattes for a few days, and then I just spent that money on these SO2 balloons, and now I've done so much more for the climate. Like, there's a big order of magnitude difference. One of these courses of action is 100 times better than the other, and this is a very effective altruism line of thought, right? Noticing that there's like a huge difference in two different courses of action, even though they may feel the same.
And, those funds thought cycles of going through should be invested in renewable energies. We should be, investing in nuclear. We should be investing in fusion. We should be making solar as cheap as humanly possible. So then there's that 10x no brainer of switching over to renewable energies versus continuing to burn fossil fuels. Fortunately, economy scales have kicked in, and we are at that precipice of, renewable energies are cheaper than most fossil fuels at this point. It's just a matter of distribution. But that time lag between that scale up is what is concerning. And that's why we kind of exist right now, is because there's that mismatch of we need to modulate some of that radiative forcing until we can get that scale up that we need.
Okay. I think by this point, maybe the viewers are thinking that this sounds too good to be true in terms of how good and cheap, this effective the SO2 atmospheric injection solution is.
Yeah,
So I guess we got to talk about like what's the catch, right? And I think you've alluded to this
totally.
before, which is like it's a band-aid, and so we're kicking the can down the road, to use your language, which
Yep.
I agree with.
Yep. Yeah.
But from my understanding, okay, we're kicking it like 50 years, and with the pace of technological progress, kicking the can 50 years seems like a really big kick.
It's a very big kick.
Yeah, but why
And
only 50 years? Why not 500 years?
uh, technically you could. It's just a matter of how much cooling we want. So this is mostly a market mechanism, in my opinion, of how much, it's a coordination problem of how much cooling everyone wants, and everyone wants
Right, right,
different types of
but
temperatures.
explain why if we dump so much SO2 into the atmosphere today, if Bill Gates just throws you $1 billion and you put it in balloons and you get all the SO2 that you want into the atmosphere, and suddenly, instead of always looking at those charts being like the temperature goes up, like we can pretty confidently say, no, it is going to start going down.
Directly
Not,
go down.
not exactly. We could make it
Yeah.
go down. So let's say
Yeah.
that happens, but then in 50 years, if we don't like do something else, we do actually somehow get screwed, right? Like what happens in 50 years?
Correct, correct. And so if we do not address the underlying issue, which is accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere, we're essentially, again, putting that like a festering wound on a Band-Aid on a festering wound. And so if we rip off that Band-Aid, you're going to get exposed to all that warming that we used to be masking.
Right, because
And so we
the,
are
the
actually,
situation in 50 years from now is you've got like so much CO2 because in this scenario we didn't even throttle down the CO2 very much, but then
exactly.
we've also got so much SO2, so it's just like right, that's kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like a
yeah, yeah.
weird scenario.
You're just putting more and more Band-Aids on top of each other, which is essentially not good, in my opinion.
But what's
There
the
is a
actual
limit.
problem?
So that's the thing. Like maybe there's some catastrophic event where we stop emitting SO2 into the atmosphere for some reason. Maybe there's war or some kind of
And then the
breakdown in
SO2
society.
decays and the CO2 doesn't decay.
Yeah. So the residence time of SO2 is roughly 1 to 3 years if injected into the stratosphere, versus CO2 lasts for anywhere from 100 to 1,000 years.
I see. Okay, so your nightmare scenario is just that we lose the SO2 and the economy is not in shape to keep the SO2 getting replaced. But I mean, that would be how bad would the economy have to be to not be able to budget like less than $1 billion a year in the entire world economy, right? It's like you think the world economy is going to at least be $1 trillion because I mean, currently the
Yeah.
world economy is like 100 trillion, right? So
Yeah.
the world
Exactly. It would be
economy is currently like a million times bigger than a million times. It would have to shrink by like 99.999% before we're like,
so.
oops.
So that's the Steelman argument that like scientists like to bring up, is termination shock, where for some reason or another, like if we just stop emitting this, like like it's so cheap and so easy to do. It literally is just really really big balloons, like some reason, then they'll unmask the warming and then cause all this catastrophic warming that we've been keeping at bay with the sulfate aerosols. We're actually experiencing that right now, right? Like I told you, like we used to emit roughly around 130 million, 140 million tons of sulfur dioxide in the troposphere back in 1979. That was peak sulfur emissions. And then we dropped it down to roughly 70 million tons back in the latest numbers, 2022. And so we've almost cut it in half. And that has also, based off papers in modeling and satellite infrastructure, specifically this one called Tropomi off the Sentinel-5P. It's a European Space Agency satellite that has LiDAR as well as infrared cameras that measures radiative forcing. And so we've seen that rise in radiative forcing. It's about since the Industrial Revolution, we're currently at 2.5 watts per square meter, which is the unit of measurement that is used to calculate how much sun we're reflecting versus absorbing.
So other people think about it in terms of like, oh, the temperature is rising, but you're thinking about it in terms of, oh, every square foot of land is getting more sunlight.
Correct. Correct.
And we know for a fact that the average, we have confident data about that, like enough satellites looking at enough places.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's how we were confident that Pinatubo actually cooled the planet down. It's because luckily NASA had satellites floating around back in 1991.
If your goal is to measure sunlight hitting the ground, the best way to do that is with a satellite or a ground station. How does this work?
You can use both. You would have to have ground stations as well, but the way that most people measure radiative forcing is via satellites. I believe there's even sensor suites on the International Space Station that actually measures radiative forcing. But the one that is the most current is the Trupomi, which is based off the European Space Agency satellites.
Okay, and what were you saying before? So we've just been noticing that the increase in CO2 has made that number go higher, but we also noticed that the decrease in SO2 from the recent ship pollution reduction, like that has also made the number go higher. Is that your point just now?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And so we've already been artificially cooling the planet, which is doing the worst way possible by applying it in the troposphere instead of the stratosphere.
Okay, so people are warning like, hey, if we do this and then for some reason we have to stop, then we get screwed. I feel very confident that if we have to stop putting SO2 into the atmosphere, as cheap and easy as it is, we're already so screwed, right? You're basically saying like, oh, so nuclear war sends us back to the Stone Age. And then not only are we in the Stone Age, but also the planet within 2 or 3 years becomes incredibly hot. And like, yeah, I agree. You're taking a nightmare scenario and making it a nightmare scenario from hell.
That's what scientists love to do, though. That's what scientists love to do, right? If you look at AI labs as well, they always try to crank them all up all the way to 11. And, what will that cause? But, we're saying, hey, we don't need to do that much.
So assuming that the economy doesn't shrink by 99%, right? A lot of models have the economy growing a few percent per year or maybe shrinking a little bit. But assuming that we're not shrinking 99% and we can still afford this cheap action of dumping SO2 into the atmosphere indefinitely, what else goes wrong in 50 years?
So 50 years based off of modeling, it depends on the amount. If you start pushing up to 8 million tons of sulfur dioxide based off the modeling, you might start to affect monsoon patterns. You might start to affect rainfall patterns. You might start to make the sky a little bit wider. These are all negative downsides to this, but again, based off modeling, if you put roughly around 2.5 million tons of sulfur dioxide per year for about 20 years, you avoid all these negative side effects. And so it's really the location and quantity matter quite a bit here.
So this warning about messing up monsoon patterns is only applicable if we dump millions of tons of SO2 into the atmosphere. And we're actually very happy to just dump like 1 million tons. Like that's plenty for us. And that's less than the threshold of the monsoon problem.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, great. So another crisis averted. So what else do the skeptics say? Like, give me the strongest argument here.
We kind of touched upon it and you brushed it and it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but it's called moral hazard, meaning that, hey, if we do have this like reverse Uno card in our hand, that means we're not going to stop burning fossil fuels. But quite honestly, I think capitalism is going to take over where there will be technologies that are just 10x better than fossil fuels. We are currently making that right now.
Wait, this is so when we talk about the 50-year band-aid, why is it a 50-year band? It just seems like it's a permanent solution.
I mean, I didn't want to say it, but you can.
Okay, I mean,
um,
well, look, I want to reserve judgment, right? Because I'm only hearing
sure.
one side of the argument because,
Yeah.
everybody likes to point out, you're getting paid. Now, realistically, when I say getting paid, you've been living on like a ramen budget, right, for like 3 years. I
Yeah.
mean, how much funding do you guys have?
We've raised $1.8 million and I pay myself $60,000 a year right now. Yeah.
All right, so you heard it here. This guy is getting paid tens of thousands of dollars per year to tell us that that there's very little downside to geoengineering with SO2. But I mean, yeah, I don't feel like that's a lot of money to make you lose your morality. I'm sure you could get a job paying more than that somewhere else.
Oh, yeah.
I think I think you founded this company because you think the argument makes sense. So I think that your credibility is actually high when you make this case. But that said, I'm open to having a guest on to come tell us why there's some strong argument to not dump SO2 into the atmosphere. But based on my research so far, and you've also mentioned Casey Hanmer, another guy that I find highly credible about his judgment on this kind of thing. And he's saying like, yeah, this is really a free lunch, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this is just crazy, right? On this show, Doom Debates, we are known for noticing when some things are like highly overrated or underrated. Most of my episodes say that in the context of AI doom. In the context of climate change, it makes me think that all these other discussions that are happening of governments being like, oh, how do we reduce our CO2 emissions? Or like, how do we rate appliances better?
It's degrowth math says communism, in my opinion.
I mean, and I would also, yeah, I would also describe it as LARPing, right? They're stepping into the social role of, like you said, like the degrowther or like the scold, right? Or like the austerity. And it's just like you can decouple it, right? It's like just
Yep.
because you care about people and you want to be seen as like upholding morality, people think it's like moral to like waste less, right? That's why I actively try to tell myself, like, no, if you like light, you turn all those lights on. Like that's actually there's more utility created for more people when I can pig out on like electricity consumption
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
because
I
I'm
mean,
paying
when
for it, right? I'm paying
candles,
15
we stopped
cents.
using candles. When we stopped using
Right.
candles, we increased productivity by I don't know how much X, but it was something where, hey, you didn't have to rely on candlelight all the time.
Right. So everybody has this set point where they think that like anything above it is like this immoral splurge and anything below it is like, come on, how do you expect me to live? It's like everybody is assuming that they get like a refrigerator, right? Everybody's assuming that they get electricity, assuming that they get TV. Everybody's like, come on, I'm not going to live like a caveman. But there's like some certain standing. So for example, like there could be somebody who drives like a very small car, like a compact car, and like, look, I'm just driving like a baseline car. But that car, by the standards of like 100 years ago, is like incredibly luxurious and excessive.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
I'm actually actively trying to train myself to just be comfortable with a high set point. You know, like I have a SUV. For a while, I was like, oh my god, an SUV is so excessive, and now I'm like, no, you deserve that SUV, or rather, you know, deserve is an ambiguous term,
Well,
but
you have a family to raise, right?
it's just it's fine to be comfortable with a crazy standard like an SUV. Like there's no one correct set point. And as long as the carbon has a geoengineering solution, we don't have to be beating ourselves up over enjoying this giant car that we like to drive around.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, and a perfect example of this is how nuclear energy was stopped in the 70s. I mean, we were scolded to think that it was a dangerous source of energy, but now it's coming back with the renaissance with the full force, which is awesome. But, you know, if we adopted nuclear energy back in the 1970s, I don't think we would be in this mess.
This is a pretty big trend now that a lot of people are discussing this idea of, you know, like American innovation and like beating China, like taking the lead because China is actually, last I heard, they have like, what is it, like 4 times more power generation than us? Like some crazy thing, like what was it, like 8 terawatts versus 1 or 2 terawatts, something like that?
It's a lot. It's stark. The stark difference is insane. And it's
Right.
a lot of solar, it's a lot of coal, it's a lot of nuclear.
So
It's
so it's like,
everything.
we feel so moral because we just haven't supplied ourselves with that much energy. Just like, dude, the sun's energy is being wasted, and if you just look up at the sky, the entire sky is dotted by extremely immoral stars, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Those stars are just radiating away the energy. I could drive such a big SUV and and not be making an impact on all this astronomical, like, literally astronomical waste that's happening in
Or create a
astronomy right now.
Dyson-sphere, right? I mean, that's the world I wanna live in, right? I wanna live in, you know, the most tech utopic, you know, society possible where we don't it's too cheap to meter is a lot of people say, right?
Exactly, right?
The
So
energy
so I
itself.
do think, I mean, the reason I'm saying all this is I do think there's a mindset shift that a lot of people in the Western world need to have, where they need to give up their guilt on consuming energy.
Yes, yes, yes. And so it's something that even like forget the environmentalists. Like if you talk to my siblings, I have 3 other siblings. They still have that fear of like, hey, if I have an extra kid or eat this meat, it's going to cause some kind of damage. And it's this weird calculus.
Right. Well, to be fair, you know, me, there's this whole conscious being suffering issue, right? But let's put that
Yeah,
aside.
sure, 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 sure. From the yeah, 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 that the animal
Let's say eating lots of tasty soybeans.
you I mean, you could. I mean, that also produces some level of greenhouse gas, but not at the level of meat. And so meat is
Yeah.
pretty beef specifically is pretty intensive.
In terms of the energy input, right? That's not a problem because we're paying for it, right? It's like, okay, yeah, we raise these creatures, which again may or may not be like a really big moral suffering crime, but putting that aside, right? It's like we
Sure.
had this energy input and we paid for it, and we use resources that are just here available. Like the earth is currently not covered in solar panels, so the sun is just throwing away its energy that we could be using, and
Yeah.
like we should just use more of it.
And that being said, like I want to live in a world where I can eat lab grown meat that costs and tastes just as good as my In-N-Out burger that I purchase like at least once a month. I want to live in that world. And so there is that net zero meat, but the technology's not there, the adoption's not there. And that requires more time. In order for you to accept that solar geoengineering is a good solution to implement, is that first you have to realize that, hey, it's getting way too hot. To the current methods of carbon removal, of planting trees, switching to EVs, switching off meat, stop flying, all these things is something that's not helping. And then three, you have to realize that, hey, this is like you got to get over the hump that instead of taking something away from the atmosphere, you're adding to it. And so that's the final hump that people usually get hung up on. But people like Casey Handmere, he's a physicist from Caltech. This is just pure physics. We're not violating any laws of physics here. But like,
Right, exactly.
that's who our most of our customers are. They're the Casey Handmers of the world. Emmett Shear's a customer. Palmer Luckey's a customer. We've got the ICP that are the ideal customer profile that I like to say is that these are climate dads. So these are guys that have STEM or finance backgrounds. They're usually ages roughly around 30 to 45. They have young kids. They probably have an EV in the driveway. They probably have some solar panels, and they just want to do more. And so, like, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. And the first hoop is that whole degrowth thing, where it's kind of like I grew up in a family of immigrants. My parents came here in the late 1970s from South Korea, war-torn country, just getting out of Korean War. They were born right after the Korean War was done, and it was just a scarcity mindset. And so that generational trauma passed on to me until I realized recycling doesn't do anything.
Right. No, totally.
After I started reading the facts that like, hey, this plastic that we generate and then we just put in our bins and carefully sort is not going anywhere.
No, I totally agree. I wonder if you might want to start orienting your marketing. I mean, right now you guys have this like enlightened theme, make sunsets, it's like an image of a sunset. And you have like a bunch of smart people supporting you, but you're kind of an indie brand. Like the average person has never heard of you and doesn't know what to think of you guys. They just think of you as like, I guess like, just science stuff, right? Like stuff that they wouldn't understand. I think you might wanna just embrace this idea of, I don't know, anti-degrowth or just like pro-growth or just like even get back to like classic American, like get a Hummer, because the Hummer is like notoriously energy inefficient. It's like, yeah, get an effing Hummer.
It's a fine balancing act. I think it's because unfortunately a lot of scientists are in the camp of degrowth, stop eating meat, stop burning fossil fuels, all this good stuff. And so and a lot of people have said, hey, you need more backing from scientists before you can scale this up. But we've read all the academic papers that are associated with this. I mean, all of them, but most of them, and like all signs point to this is directionally correct and it works.
Now, unfortunately, our government, like in California in particular, our government is working against us here because look at this. I was using Pacific Gas and Electric, the local energy company, when I lived in California, and they sent me this statement, and it was like, how you compare to others. Efficient homes, 310 units, talking about like 310 units of energy. Similar homes, 734 units.
Yeah,
You, 1,221 units.
yeah, yeah,
And that's excluding my electric vehicle. So if you add my electric vehicle charging, yeah. So
yeah.
I'm literally
14.
using twice as much as similar homes, according to PG&E, and I'm using like 4 times as much as what they say an efficient home is using. So it's saying your home energy use was higher than similar homes by 66%. So
Yeah.
I think that they're trying to like guilt me into using less energy, but I joked about it. I wrote a tweet and I was like, PG&E sent me this thoughtful letter of recognition that I've been creating more energy demand than the average guy. Just doing my part to keep up with China. High five.
I mean, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. And it's something where, yeah, it's a thing that people have to get over, and it's a certain mind shift. Because I also believe in like prior to starting to make sunsets, I was a casual observer of climate change. I was a casual observer of how to actually address it. I was a Boy Scout. I thought planting trees, turning off your lights when you leave the room, all these like kind of nice things to do that you were kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Um, psyopted into, saying that it somehow it'll help. Doesn't help. It doesn't work.
Yeah. So
Literally
so
walking us is the way.
consider being like a, this is America.
Yeah.
America is, and I see it where I live now in upstate New York. compared to California, there's more land. And so they can build things out more. And there's more of that culture of like, hey, you bought this property, go ahead and build, build out a new room for it. Like install like a giant water heater, giant furnace, like go get another pool, heat the pool, like whatever you want to do. This is your space. This is America.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want you to stop from doing that. You can do, this is the land of the free. So go ahead and do that, but buy some cooling credits in the meantime, which is
Right.
super cheap.
Exactly. Because then you will be morally good. Like it only costs like 15 cents to be morally good. And honestly, the real solution isn't for these random individuals to be paying 15 cents to morally license themselves to emit carbon dioxide for a year. The real solution is either for the government to do it, to bake it into the cost, cap and trade, whatever, or
Yes.
because the problem is so easy. It's not even a hard problem. It's so easy. It's literally just
It's
like
a quick win.
Bill Gates, call me. Okay. You can have premium access to Doom debates. And, I'm sure you guys will give them premium access to whatever you guys are offering. And that's it. And you guys can pretty much you don't need any other customers to use you. You just need one billionaire to write one check and then you're good for a year.
And right off into the sunset.
It's funny, people always joke, on Twitter, there's this running joke, like whenever they hear about something like, oh, Jeff Bezos is worth like 100 billion, and people joke, if Jeff Bezos just distributed his wealth to every American, we would all have $1 million. And the
Right.
joke is that like the math doesn't add up, right? It's like
Right,
we'd
right,
all
right,
have
right,
like
right.
maybe $1,000 or something, and then we spend
Right.
it, and then it's
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
In the case of your company offsetting the CO2, it actually is true that Bill Gates could offset. Like literally, if Bill Gates just donated all of his wealth, right? Let's say he has like, I don't know, 50 billion, 100 billion, something like that. If he donated all of that into a foundation to just fund you, he
Mhm.
actually would offset all of our CO2 forever, permanently.
You're correct.
Right?
Well,
So
50 years, roughly.
it's
I don't know if
crazy
he's
stuff.
worth 50 years. It's crazy stuff.
It's crazy stuff because the amount of energy that goes into the amount of human energy, right? The amount of human effort that goes into like whatever protests. Remember, there was like a extinction rebellion in Europe, right? So they're like going and like I don't know what they're doing. They're like destroying paintings in museums
Yeah,
because they're like, hey, we're going extinct,
throwing
right?
soup paintings, blocking traffic, all that kind of stuff. The funny thing is, the most ironic thing is the three founders of Extinction Rebellion, it was actually two years ago, they came out with a blog post saying, hey, we messed up. We actually noticed that these ship tracks are causing warming after we cleaned up the emissions. We got to add the sulfur back into the shipping fuel.
Wow, they
And
said
so
that.
even the most extreme environmentalists who are doing this, they're now suggesting this form of geoengineering. We're saying we can do it better by putting it in the stratosphere instead of continually emitting it at sea level, essentially.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, this gets to the theme of like civilizational insanity, right? It's like this isn't that the argument we just made about SO2. It's not a complicated argument. The numbers are amazing, right? How cheap it is to solve the problem and
Yeah.
stop whining, right? Everybody's like whining and
And we
complaining
have
about this problem.
literal natural experiments that we can reference, aka volcanic eruptions.
Right. It's just so amazing because I always thought until a couple years ago when I heard about what you guys were doing in SO2, I just always thought that with climate change, we're screwed because it's a coordination problem, right? I was always like, you have to get people to coordinate because even if the US does cap and trade, then China is going to get ahead of us because they're not going to do it. And then their CO2 is still going to affect us. And so it's a tragedy of the commons. And I was like, man, humanity is just bad at these coordination problems. And you guys cut the Gordian knot. It's just one billionaire can take his yacht out to the ocean and just start throwing up SO2 balloons and solving the entire world's problem. Zero coordination needed. I mean, you mentioned NIMBYs blocking it, but
Yeah.
they're not hard
You
to get
can't do it
around.
in international waters, 100%.
Right.
Like
You do it in
that's
international
one of the
waters.
jokes that we have. Yeah. I mean, if you want to drive the point further, like we've had one of the ship captains of a Greenpeace boat saying, "Hey, if you need to go deploy in international waters, I'm your captain."
Okay, exactly, right. It's like we're so close. This gives hard problems a bad name. Because when I heard this, it made me step back and I'm like, is every hard problem just trivially easy, right? But then in the case of AI Doom, I'm always saying on the show, no, it's not. It's actually really, really, really hard. Like this is truly hard. But the climate
Yeah.
change problem, it's giving hard problems a bad name.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's just we've been shooting ourselves in the foot for the past since Carl Sagan testified in front of Congress back in 1980, saying, "Hey, we should look into this greenhouse gas thing. It's warming up the planet." We've just been stumbling and fumbling the ball continually for that period of time.
Right. Now, I think there is a bit of good news here because even though we're so insane that we'd rather, moralize about using less energy and like pretend like it's a coordination problem, even though we'd rather do that right now, I do feel optimistic that as the problem gets worse and worse, there will be more people like you who, there will be that Bill Gates who writes that check, and then we'll solve it. I feel optimistic about that, it'll just get a little worse and then we'll solve it.
I agree. I agree. I've said this in front of mainstream media all the time. It's like our best marketing person is nature. As the world gets hotter, people will realize, hey, what are we doing here? Like, clearly, we're not addressing the CO2 problem. What really is going to kill us first is the heat. And so, how can we address the heat? And people
Right.
will start saying, hey, there's this volcano that did it in 1991, and again, another volcano did it in 2022, and nothing bad happened, in my opinion. There were some tsunamis that unfortunately maybe killed like roughly less than 10 people in 2022, but they were just too close to the shore. The actual sulfate aerosols did not do anything other than cool down the planet by 0.1 degrees Celsius in the southern hemisphere.
Crazy.
I honestly think climate change is one of the stupidest problems that humanity has created for themselves. It's really one of the dumbest problems that like humans have just shot themselves in the foot continuously for the past, 40 years.
Now, do you say that just because the SO2 solution is so easy, or do you also think that it's dumb that it even got this bad with CO2?
Dumb that it got this bad with CO2 because of the nuclear energy that we fumbled back in 1970s.
That's right. You know what? That is actually worth stopping on too, because in terms of how easy this problem was, we could have been building way more nuclear power plants, 40 or 50 years ago. And then we wouldn't have even had the CO2 emissions. And that was an exit ramp, right? And it would have had like so little downside. We could have just exit ramped off the whole CO2 problems. But now with SO2, it's just another exit ramp. And these are just like
Yep.
two amazing exit ramps. And this is what I'm saying, like, as you say, right? It's giving hard problems a bad name. Once you look into this, it just gives you this attitude of like, Matt Ridley, there's this great book, The Rational Optimist. And there's a lot of books that are kind of following in their wake. Like I think Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now. He's highly optimistic. Like, there's so many of these enlightened optimists, and when you
Yeah.
point them to a problem like climate change, that just reinforces them. And that's why whenever I try to point people to something that I think is like an actual existential threat that we probably aren't going to solve because it's too hard, they're so conditioned by all of these fake hard problems that they're like, no, we'll solve it. It's fine.
Yeah. 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 It's something like it's not, to be fair, like, you yourself have admitted like this is actually not a hard problem. It took a while for us to get to that point, just through this conversation, through the questions that you asked. You have to lead with that curiosity. Because again, like at the end of the day, there's that knee-jerk reaction. Wait, what? You're not removing anything from the atmosphere, you're actually adding to it. That just automatically gives everyone pause, saying, why are you doing this? And then they have to understand physics, really. They do.
Right.
So there's only a small slice of people. And so then I use analogies like Ozempic for climate change, Band-Aids. Tourniquet is another one, right? You got to stop the bleeding so we can get to the operating table. We're not even close to the operating table, right? In terms of actually addressing the root cause.
Yeah, but I kind of take issue with those particular choices of analogy because like a tourniquet, I don't even see it as a tourniquet. I just see it as like, it's just part of the machine that runs the economy. Yeah, part of the machine is we squirt some SO2 in the atmosphere and it's fine. Part of the machine is we pave roads, we lay fiber. It's like whatever, we squirt SO2. It's not a tourniquet. It's just working fine.
I agree. Thank you.
No,
Thank
for
you
sure.
for taking me out of that.
Yeah. Now, maybe a disanalogy is like, okay, it's working fine, but maybe if there's like a ton of SO2, maybe we have to do something else in 50 years, depending on how the conditions change. Okay, fine. Like we're always adapting. Like it's just not a big deal. You don't have to act like it's a big deal.
Space mirrors. Space
Right,
mirrors.
exactly right.
If
There's so many
if we don't
options.
have space mirrors, like we failed as a society, in my opinion. Like what is the prediction that Elon, starts to, colonize Mars? Like it's within the 50-year time window, right? So like at that point, we had the technology to literally launch satellites, space constellation satellites to reflect 1 to 2% of the sun's energy away from Earth.
Right. Okay, so that's humanity's future of solving climate change and reducing climate doom. Let's talk about Make Sunsets and how you see this company doing a big part in this, because it seems like you guys have been starting small so far, right? You've got like a couple hundred individuals who are basically your customer, just paying to get these balloons off the ground. But like your total expenditure on the balloons has just been like $1 million or $2 million so far, correct?
Yeah, we've burned roughly about $1 million so far of the 1.8 we've raised.
Right. And the cost to like offset the year of climate change is more like $1 billion, right? So you're 0.1% of the way there.
Yeah,
Roughly speaking. Yeah. Okay. So what do you think is the shortest path to you guys just having that $1 billion to solve the problem?
I mean, you kind of touched upon it. Like we're currently having
Bill Gates?
conversations with billionaires.
Bill Gates,
Bill
hint, hint.
Gates,
Yeah, Dustin Moskovitz, come on, man.
If I like, so like we've had like we've
Yeah,
heard from
where's Sam
other
Bankman-Fried
channels.
when you need him?
Exactly, right? He's in jail, unfortunately. But I mean, there are a lot of people who care about this enough that, we're having those conversations right now. But in the meantime, as you said, governments will eventually want to have to pay for this. And in order to signal that is you need the people to support this. And so my thinking is that you need a lot of smart people to talk about this before you can convince others to implement this at scale.
If you were to get together governments for like an international conference discussing how you're going to share the burden, literally the cost of the leader's time getting the conference together, you've already wasted $1 billion. Like the US
Yeah,
should just
probably.
write the check.
I mean, and this is a funny tactic that we've heard from our right leaning friends is that Donald Trump could just own the libs here by saying,
Exactly
"Hey,
right.
I'm gonna go. You libs have been struggling with this climate change thing and talking about it and struggling with it and complaining about it since 1980s. Like I'm just gonna drop $1 billion check and I'm just gonna own you libs."
I mean, that's right. The US, just the US alone, spent like $5 trillion on pandemic relief. And this doesn't even include like Operation Warp Speed. It's literally like writing $5 trillion worth of checks. So you could have solved climate change 5,000 times while you were offsetting
Yep.
the COVID pandemic.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, crazy stuff. I'm just, I'm a bit of a one-track mind, and I'm just never going to get
No, it's
over
fair.
how
Or
cheap
another
it
way to
is.
think about it too, it's like I think the more like yes, the one billionaire could do it. However, we're touching upon like COVID as well. It's like unfortunately Bill got his name dragged through the mud because he was funding vaccine research. And so it's like there's a small group of people, less than 10% that think that chemtrails are real. And there are very coordinated and vocal amount of people that have
Yeah,
caused a
yeah.
lot of FUD, in my opinion, that cause normal people to take pause and not embrace this fully. Fortunately, the smart people like Casey Handmers of the world, they see past that and they understand the physics. And so it's something it's by using this grassroots movement, I think, in my opinion, creates a stronger base. So then, one guy just can't be toppled. I mean, I think, that's like, unfortunately, if like enough chemtrails people started spamming Bill Gates, like what happened with the whole COVID thing, like it just obviously gives a lot of people pause. And so having that support from people, from specifically smart people, is what keeps this durable.
What motivated you to make this your life's work as of 3 years ago?
It was something. I mean, really, it was my kids. Before I was selling SaaS, either as a first sales hire of a early, startup or the first non-technical hire. And I like to think that I always cared about the environment, but I felt like I didn't have a good solution. But in the meantime, as I was struggling through how am I going to help with this climate thing, I was building up my skills of how to sell, how to market, how to share these ideas. And I was very fortunate to have a crazy co-founder named Luke Iseman who read this book called Termination Shock by Neil Stephenson. It's essentially this Texas billionaire who says, "Hey, I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to send sulfur dioxide artillery pieces into shells into the stratosphere to cool Earth." And so that gave the inspiration for Luke to do it. And then he convinced me, "Hey, man, like we're going to put sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. You want to help me?" And, initially, obviously, I had the same reaction as you and had those same types of questions. But this has been studied since the 1970s, and there's over 2,000 academic papers written about this. The big thing here is like the incremental step is really we need in situ data that is not based off volcanic eruptions, not based off of ground level emissions, but just pure SO2 in the stratosphere that can be detectable by satellite infrastructure.
Right,
And
right,
then
right, right.
that question
Yeah.
becomes, hey, there's no volcanic eruptions happening in Northern California. Hey, looks like they cooled the planet by zero point 0.1 degrees Celsius. Who was that? Oh, hey, it makes sense. That's high. That's us.
Yeah, right. I
Now it's
see.
how much
Interesting.
do you want to cool it by?
People talk about a marketing strategy and a distribution channel. Like, how are you going to get users? Are they going to be using Facebook and scrolling and they see your ad? In your case, it's like, well, the government's going to be monitoring the amount of heat that hits the earth and they'll see the graph
Yeah.
trend down and then they'll go call us.
It's pure. I mean, it's. You can access the data right now. You can go to the ESA or NOAA or NASA
Right, right, right.
website and
Exactly.
download this data right now.
Maybe
So
you
it's
can
it's
maybe you can run a banner ad on the NOAA site.
That'd be funny. I don't think they accept ads, but that'd be pretty funny if we could.
Right. Yeah. But speaking of your kind of growth strategy, right? I mean, what's like the profit equation here, right? It's like you profit when everybody's like, oh, okay, we should do this. Let's go pay this company. And then you'll have like some margins, right, where you make money on every balloon.
Correct, correct. And we actually share this on our website. Currently, to deploy 1 gram of SO2 into the stratosphere, we charge $1 if you commit to a monthly subscription. And it currently costs us 28 cents to deploy that gram. And this is with off-the-shelf parts. and the current quantities that we're buying of lift gases as well as the SO2.
You're structured as a for-profit, right?
Correct.
But if Bill Gates wanted to just donate $1 billion and then you could take however many hundreds of thousands as your salary, right, directing the project, doesn't it just make more sense for him to do it as a 501c3 nonprofit donation?
So we actually have an answer to that. So we have a fiscal sponsor. So
Ah,
you can go to givebutter.com/makesunsets. And if you want a tax deduction and make a charitable donation, we've partnered with a fiscal sponsor in order for you to do that.
great. Yeah, we'll put that up in the show notes. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is specifically Americans, obviously, because we can't do that for other countries. But if you are an American and you pay American taxes, you can actually get a tax deduction where every single dollar that you contribute to Make Sunsets through the fiscal sponsor will go towards offsetting the warming effect of 1 ton of CO2 for a year.
Got it. Now, can this ever be that big of a company? Like, could you ever profit billions of dollars a year? Because it seems like the entire, people talk about the market, right? The total
Sure.
addressable market. We
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
talked about how cheap this is to solve the problem, right? So you could
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
make more than $1 billion a year.
So the thing there too is that we're currently artificially pricing it at this price point because that's what we think is what will move the needle. But there is a world where supply and demand curves will kick in, and essentially there will only be so many players in the market that will be deploying, and just like how carbon credits are priced, there's only a fixed amount of SO2 that you want to put up into the atmosphere, and so there will be privileged people, in my opinion, that are willing to pay the price at whatever cost that
Wait, but
that the
isn't this a
market
commodity, right?
bears.
If it starts being popular to donate to organizations like yours, then organizations will just spring up and they'll just compete away all of their profit.
It could be, but one of the things that we're thinking about is essentially creating like one of the patents that we've filed is around the licensing of it, because what the coordination there's a coordination problem here. You have to understand how much sulfur dioxide is going where, and so if we can own essentially a ledger, it doesn't have to be crypto, obviously, but own the ledger of how much sulfate aerosols are going up where, and either you pay us or we pay you in order to deploy those sulfur dioxide things, then we have a standard here instead of just people doing uncoordinated releases.
Right, but the nice thing about doing uncoordinated releases is that it's uncoordinated and you can still just monitor the net effect, right? So it's a control system and everybody can just look at how much temperature we need to be reducing right now and then just anybody can do it. Like you don't have to coordinate. You don't even need a ledger.
You need some coordination, but it's something where it's nice to have. In an ideal situation, we have AI taking care of all of this, where essentially it's pulling data from the satellites and then it's saying, "Oh, here's a hotspot. Hey, pay someone to maybe it's like a DAO where you have someone that can essentially deploy based off the stratosphere winds and how they travel. You deploy like this location at this latitude to cover that area." It's not localized like per se, but I'm oversimplifying this. But essentially, there's something there where I like to think it would be something that could be just AI driven.
Cool. All right. So as we wrap up, let's just connect it to other things we're hearing about in the economy. We've got this huge AI build out that's happening now, and new power plants are going up. For instance, OpenAI is doing Stargate, and they're talking about a 5 gigawatt natural gas power plant to power Stargate. So, what does that mean in terms of sulfur dioxide offsets?
Great question. And so, a 5 gigawatt natural gas power plant emits roughly around 19 million tons of CO2 per year. In order to neutralize that warming effect for a year, you would need 19 tons of sulfur dioxide placed in the stratosphere.
Now, with your current small balloons, if you want to get 19 tons up there, you got to launch 19,000, which is that's like a couple people being really busy for a year. Right.
Sure,
But I
sure.
mean, Stargate is a multi-$100 billion project. And you're just saying,
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, you just need to get a couple of guys. I mean, you could probably do it in less than $1 million, right? To fully offset their CO2.
At the scales that we're talking about, at less than 1 cent per gram, yeah. But we got to make a little margin there. So yeah,
If you were to dig through Stargate's budget, which is like 100 billion plus,
it's a rounding error.
there's probably somebody whose job it is to do something related to climate BS that won't actually move the needle. And if they just redirected those $1 million, there's probably somebody who's just writing like shareholder letters about how they're trying to stay green. And if they just launched the damn balloons, they could actually just have zero net warming impact.
Exactly. And hopefully someone from Stargate is listening right now.
Yeah, that's right. Somebody from Stargate, call us. Okay, my summary of the conversation is playing God is good. A lot of people have this intuition like, no, don't play God. Of course, meanwhile, all the AI companies are building a smarter than human God who's probably going to run away with the future, but they're too squeamish to dump some gas into the earth. Like, we can't play God with a dumb earth. people have this intuition that it's bad to play God because the environment is so big and scary. Like, how can a human species ever compete with like the whole big environment, like all of nature? People don't intuitively realize that the tables are turning and the power of all of us humans and our brains, and of course the machines that we're building to potentially replace our brains, all of that power is actually flipping the tables on nature. Like, we don't have to be afraid of nature anymore because we are more powerful than it. We don't have to defer to nature. And like, yes, we want to have the right amount of deference. Like, if you're swimming in the ocean, like, good luck, the ocean is much more powerful than you. Okay. But just be aware that the tables are turning. Like, don't get used to this idea of being subservient to nature.
And we have leverage with sulfate aerosols in the stratosphere.
Exactly. Yeah. Way to tie that together. All right. So Andrew, so go ahead and plug, how can the viewers help? I think a lot of the viewers are nodding along. Some of them are probably like pissed off, but I do think a good fraction are nodding along and they actually want to help. So tell them out.
So if you want to help us out, you can go to givebutter.com/makesunsets, or to get a tax deduction if you're American, or you can go directly to our website at makesunsets.com and buy some cooling credits. Sign up for a subscription. For $30 a month, you can offset the warming effect of 30 tons of CO2 for a year.
Hell yeah. Now, let's be honest, when you guys go do that, it's going to be a drop in the bucket and it doesn't really matter. But it does matter in terms of boosting Make Sunsets' metrics so that when they go approach the billionaires and the governments of the world, they're like, listen, there's grassroots support for this. So it's basically a nice, high quality token action, correct?
Correct.
And if you want to do more than a token action, it really just is about helping Andrew and Luke, the co-founders, get in front of charitable, wealthy people who can just solve the problem.
That's the hope.
Cool. All right. Anything else you want to plug?
I mean, that's essentially what we've been doing, right? Like,
Yeah.
we started with the Casey Handmers, who, he's a smart guy, has influence, but he has introduced us to investors. He has introduced us to other people, and it's just like these smart people with a lot of credibility have stuck their necks out for us, and it's something I deeply appreciate, including yourself. I mean, you didn't have to have me on this podcast, and really, it's a marketing issue. It's not enough people know about this. They don't know how cheap it is. They don't know how easy it is to solve in terms of the amount and the logistics. It's really just a dumb problem that just needs to be addressed. And I think it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, it's much simpler to do this than try and influence people and change their lives and scold them into something that they don't want to be.
Is there anybody else besides Make Sunsets that's carrying this torch of doing SO2 geoengineering?
No one is currently active deploying. There is a very small amount of scientists that are focused on modeling, but in my opinion, we need to take that next step, which is actual field deployments to get that in situ data to improve those models, because right now they're just essentially on a modeling treadmill, which is unfortunate.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, from my perspective, if you guys didn't exist, there would just be this obvious idea that nobody's picking up and running with. So I'm more than happy to signal boost something that I think is like wildly underrated and useful. And I hope somebody else takes it from here, specifically with
Thank
like,
you.
funding it or signal boosting it further.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Andrew Song, thanks so much for coming on Doom Debates.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.